Welcome to the 2022 Cardiff University Cybersecurity Lecture Series. I am Kevin Jones. I'm an Honorary Professor here at Cardiff University, and I'm also the Group CISO at Airbus. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Lindy Cameron, who is the CEO of the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, for this first fireside discussion talking about critical national infrastructure and what the UK is doing for cybersecurity. So Lindy, absolute pleasure to have you with us today at Cardiff University. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about the NCSC and your journey to the NCSC.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kevin. It's fantastic to be here today, and also very grateful for the amazing tour I've just had of the Cyber Defence Lab here, which is a fantastic facility, I think, for both your students and researchers. So, as you said, I'm the CEO of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. The centre's existed for almost 6 years now. We think of ourselves as the UK's team captain for cybersecurity. So it's not that we do everything, but we try and bring together the best of what the UK does to make sure that the UK is, as ministers want, the safest place to live and work online. We're part of GCHQ and part of the UK's intelligence services, but we have a very different public, outward-facing brand, which means we have fantastic relationships with industry. We speak direct to the public, so we run public awareness campaigns on cybersecurity, as well as then doing some of the fantastic research that allows us to understand not just the security threats today, but also those of the future. We're also responsible for effectively running the UK's incident response to serious national incidents with national significance. So touch wood, waiting for the next one.
And in terms of the National Cybersecurity Centre, it's a very interesting time at the moment with everything that's going on in cybersecurity. What are your priorities for this year, and what do you expect to be seeing?
So I've been in the job now for about 18 months, and it's been a pretty interesting time, I think, for the entire time I've been in the job. So, solar winds happened pretty rapidly after I got there, the colonial pipeline then last year, of course, and that real step up in particular US political engagement with the Biden administration, and a real commitment to putting cybersecurity on the table at events like the G7 that meant that you were having a very different level of political conversation at ministerial level and international level about cybersecurity. So I think we've really cracked out of that kind of technical space. It's now at the right level, political leader levels, CEO in the boardroom, not just the domain of the CISO. So I think you're right, even more interesting time right now. So in particular, obviously, the kind of current focus of our attention is the Russia-Ukraine crisis. That came hot on the heels, obviously, of the Log4Shell sort of debate before Christmas. So I think a lot of cyber teams around the place at the moment are pretty tired, having run quite hard towards addressing that vulnerability before Christmas, and then now, ever since Christmas, really focused on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Obviously, we've seen quite a lot of Russian activity in Ukraine, but in some ways, I think in the media, that's been sort of swamped by the attention on the absolutely horrific physical kinetic conflict that's been taking place. We've seen, obviously, DDoS attacks, we've seen wiper malware installed, and we have seen, I think, interference with satellite systems. So there are a number of things going on. What we've been saying to people is that this is a time to be particularly vigilant. We're not seeing specific threats to the UK and to CNI in particular, but we are saying that actually, you should have been paying a lot of attention to this anyway. Please really make sure that you're paying attention to it now. Please do all the things that we've been telling you to do for some time that you should be doing, but don't panic. So we really don't want you to overreact. I know you and I have had this conversation. This is not the time to rush around doing things you haven't thought through or haven't prepared, haven't understood the consequences of. This is the time to be accelerating the programs you kind of know you should be getting on with anyway, to be heightening that level of vigilance and understanding what's going on. But I think then, to be honest, it's really important we don't just get focused on the current crisis. This is a manifestation of a known threat, but not the only threat. The biggest threat to UK business and indeed to society, I think, remains the threat from cyber criminals, and in particular the threat from ransomware, which we saw some really nasty manifestations of last year, the Irish health system as well as colonial pipeline. And that remains an existing threat, and we remain concerned that businesses are not yet well enough prepared to respond against known threats that ought to be entirely resilient to already. And then in the long run, I would say, we continue to remain concerned about the change in technology. So in 10 years' time, I don't imagine the cybersecurity threat or the cybersecurity challenge will look the same as it does now. So that doesn't mean we should change the resilience planning we're doing now, because frankly, we should get on with doing everything we can. It will still help. But we also need to be thinking forward to the future challenges we'll face, I think, when, frankly, the world of technology will look quite different. And some of the changes we're seeing now, I think with the kind of the private sector response to the Russia-Ukraine crisis in particular, I think is a good indication of some of the kind of, the balkanization of technology, the changing markets that might drive different behavior, and that I think is something we worry about in the long run.
Yeah, certainly from a CISO's perspective, having worked with the NCSC for quite a number of years as well, it's one of the big advantages that I see that the UK specifically has is that industry, government and academic, almost if you like, partnership that the NCSC creates. And a lot of the threat intelligence that comes from the NCSC, a lot of the advice that comes from the NCSC, the guidance and standards or anti-patterns as well, which I know is a particular favourite, where you say what not to do, what bad looks
exactly.
like. I think from an industry perspective, that's really useful. So what would you say is some of the biggest successes that you've had for industry in the UK within the NCSC?
So I think it's creating that partnership. You're absolutely right. I mean, I think that, because it's not just us that transmits to industry. Actually, what we see is actually not just us learning from industry, but also encouraging that collaboration between industry. So for things like the Financial Services Collaboration Centre, for example, that helps the financial services industry to share understanding across the sector, facilitated and supported by us, but very much something that we don't imagine ourselves being sort of the leader of forever. And so I think there's something around how it is we help to encourage that conversation that we can then add the sort of highest level insight, informed by intelligence, informed by genuinely world-class expertise, but actually getting to the point where it's not all about us. So, and I think you see a lot of other peers of ours doing that around the world now, particularly in the US. I think some of the work Jen Easterly is leading at CISO. But I think we're lucky to have been a number of years ahead. Part of the challenge, I think, is also how we then, as we move into a COVID endemic phase, reinvigorate that kind of, I think, innovative collaboration that we were doing before, which has gone online, but which we need to. It's those coincidental conversations where people bump into each other in the office, we share the ideas, we think about where we take it to the next level. So I think building our I-100 program, where we're able to have secondees and partners from a whole range of different parts of industry talking to each other as well as to us, I think that's been one of the big successes. But I think then it's also the ability to share information, but share it at speed and share it in confidence as well. So the knowledge that actually, there are trust groups within whom we can have conversations that we don't expect to go public, but by having that circle of trust, we protect each other better.
And it enables business to be much more agile and having that level of situational awareness that comes from actually the breadth at which you see across the UK and across industries can help us to really improve as well, which is invaluable, actually, quite frankly.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the next level will be to take it, I think, to the real multinational level, because what increasingly I hear, and this is part of the conversation I think with CNI from CEOs in that sector, is they are often businesses that operate globally, they'll operate in more than one jurisdiction, and I think part of the challenge is to try and have an international conversation that means that this doesn't feel like a set of silos, this feels like a global conversation, and it's a race to best practice in a way that means we all learn from the regulatory environments and the kind of incentives that we set, and frankly, we will shamelessly copy what we think other people are doing that we think works really well, but we also look forward to people learning from us too.
Yeah, exactly. Talking of CNI, actually, very timely at the moment. We know, and we've heard for years about the threat to UK critical national infrastructure, whether that's power or water or transport sectors or food distribution. What are we seeing at the moment in terms of the threat landscape specifically to CNI, and what should we really be aware of?
So I think, the threat landscape to CNI very much is that combination of state threats, capability and intent, and there we talk about 4 state actors that we worry about in particular: Russia, China, North Korea and Iran. But also, as I said, that ransomware threat. And I think we've worried in particular in the run-up to the Russia crisis around the potential for spillover. Obviously, the real sort of low point a few years ago of the NotPetya incident, which had such a global impact as a result of a Russian attack in Ukraine. So I think we want CNI in particular to be conscious of that heightened level of risk, conscious that they are a point of that they are really vital. I think we've seen through COVID the understanding of the industries that are really vital to the UK's prosperity, not just security, but also the dependencies between those sectors. I think one of the things that really struck me is that often we see sectors thinking about the resilience within their own sector, but it's actually the dependencies between sectors that I think we really need to continue understanding better and working through and essentially exercising to ensure that we've understood the consequences. So in terms of threat, it remains fundamentally a combination of states and criminals. I think that hasn't changed much, but again, the good thing is in CNI as everywhere else, frankly, most of the things you can do will protect you against most of the things that can happen to you, and I think it's getting that that shift in resilience, and in particular that shift in behaviour and culture. And again, we talked about this. I think that we need to think about individuals in these organisations as well as the organisation and the sector as entities in itself to try and shift that level of behaviour and resilience.
The dependency piece is absolutely fascinating. So there's some wonderful research here at the university that we've worked with them on dependency modelling, because it's one thing that everybody misses, either at a macro level within an organisation, or as you said, at a CNI and nation state level, because if you're trying to defend here, this system or this environment, but then you realise that the most critical dependency is 2 or 3 systems away in a systems of systems type approach, you can still have huge consequences because of a ransomware in other parts. And it's one of the real specialisms of the university here that they've been working on and come up with some good solutions to be able to have dependency modelling over a risk assessment, and the UK is quite strong in that area as well, which is really pleasing to see.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's, and of course I think the conversation that's been going on the last year about the supply chain and the understanding that in particular I think vulnerabilities in your supply chain can hit home pretty quickly. I'm delighted that's now much more of a public conversation, and I think it's really important that businesses think about, frankly, asking the kind of questions that the defence industry has asked for a long time about its supply chain, worried about insider threat, for example. It's no different, I think, to thinking about where your dependencies are and actually whether your suppliers understand the risk that they could impose on you and whether they're behaving in that way. So I think, as we move to the cloud, I think there's some real opportunities for smaller businesses actually to frankly have somebody else help them manage that risk. But actually there's also an opportunity for bigger businesses to sort of have a much more active conversation about how that risk is transferred.
Yeah, and supply chain is huge for all of us at the moment. We obviously have supplier contracts with security annexes. We have audit, but actually I think the industry is moving much more further than that, away from just that hands-on and tick box exercise, if you like. It's really engaging the supply chain, supporting the supply chain. I mean, we certainly see 4 or 5 suppliers a month that are getting hit by ransomware right now, just throughout some of the aviation sector.
Yes.
And that's something we have to help them with, and because they don't have the capacities we do. And I know it's actively encouraged with people like the NCSC and other national authorities as well in the areas we operate, that we're doing that as a community. So I think that's really valuable. And certainly for CNI, I know that goes on with information sharing platforms.
Exactly.
So I actually have the privilege at the moment to be the industry chair for the NCSC Industrial Control System Community of Interest. I think we probably need a shorter name for that.
Yes, good acronym.
But it brings together exactly those 3 pillars, NCSC, academia and industry, with all of the CNI operators as well, to bring the UK expertise into one place to share and to solve challenges. So specifically around the CNI as well, how do you see those type of NCSC engagements and what value they bring to the community?
So I think, the conversation alone has huge value, but I think then putting the experts in a room together to really sort of co-design the responses, I think is fantastic. Because of course I think we see different levels of maturity across different sectors, and actually one of the things I'm really keen to encourage again is that we learn from best practice. So that we use the cyber assessment framework across CNI as a kind of maturity model to try and understand where different sectors are at. And of course, different sectors come at this with a different level of understanding of, frankly, how critical they are, to be blunt. The telecom sector, I think, is on a real journey, to becoming, to understanding the level of dependence the entire economy has on it. There are other sectors, nuclear, for example, I think, that have a really deep understanding of the safety issues that mean that in some ways this is much more intuitive. So part of what we want to do is get a better understanding of the relative maturity of different sectors, help ones that are doing pretty well to share those lessons with others. And in particular, of course, you mentioned the industrial controls issue, making sure that industries that have been quite dependent on old technology that people never assume will be connected to the internet are really making it resilient to the future. And I think, again, that's part of a sort of mindset of understanding that actually you can't simply fire and forget. You can't simply buy a system and then assume it'll be fine forever, because the world and the context is changing around you, and actually that needs to be an ongoing, frankly, good risk management debate, which is pretty live.
And I think you talk exactly right there about industrial control systems. They don't change for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's a completely different world where you're having to encapsulate security around them while still enabling digital transformation to have the cloud or part of the IT infrastructures and your data analytics that come in with that as well. And that certainly poses threats and challenges for things like ransomware, for those systems that you're trying to encapsulate and don't have that level of resilience in their core and by design.
Exactly.
So, in terms of the ransomware threat, either in CNI or more generally, how do you see that evolving from where we are today? And really, what can companies do about it? Because it seems to be the really hot topic at the moment. Everybody's just talking about it.
So I think it is a hot topic. I mean, I think the sort of a number of big incidents where organisations realised this wasn't just something where you could hope it didn't happen to you. It wasn't something where you could frankly hope you could pay the ransom and get away with it, because in almost every instance, paying a ransom makes you much more likely to be a victim the next time round. You look like an attractive target to criminals, but also actually most of the work is in the remediation and the cleanup. So I think we're having a live conversation about how to make sure there's an effective insurance market, for example. But I think we're keeping an eye on the evolution of the criminal groups. So, these are sophisticated criminal operators, much as we've seen in other sort of non-cyber sectors. And I think understanding how they operate as a system, where their vulnerabilities are, is bluntly what they do to us. They look for the weak points. They look for the businesses and sectors that are exposed. They look for the easy ways to make money. I mean, at heart, criminals want to make money, and so they'll do that in the easiest way possible. Of course, it's much easier to do that if you're sitting in a jurisdiction where you're much less likely to be arrested. So we had a really great ransomware sprint towards the back end of last year, working with partners across government, but also internationally, really sharing insight between law enforcement partners and ourselves. So understanding how to see this criminal network as a system, and thinking about how it is we can address that most effectively. I mean, mostly what I want to do is encourage businesses to assume it will happen to them and be prepared for the day when it does, and to ensure that CEOs and boards have really thought through what their response would look like, because much like I think any kind of phishing attack on an individual, it's when you're emotionally sort of frightened, scared on the back foot, and that applies to boards as much as it does individuals, that you're much less likely to make rational, sensible decisions or be able to kind of hold firm in the face of the kind of pressure that they'll put on you. So, knowing, frankly, which of your systems are really critical, knowing, frankly, how long you can afford for them to be down, how will you communicate with your customers, how will you communicate with your staff in this, what will you say, what are your red lines? What does your insurance cover? I mean, these are all the questions that boards ought to be asking themselves well before something happens. And that's why we have tools like Exercise in a Box to try and help people game through those scenarios and understand it. And not be afraid of the fact this is technical. In many ways, the least important question is sort of who did it and how did they do it. The most important question is, how are you going to recover as fast as possible in a way that means that your customers and staff, frankly, will notice as little disruption as possible.
Everybody loves a game of cyber Cluedo. It's
exactly.
Who done it, but actually, from a business perspective, it's the last thing I actually care about. I care about the threat intelligence that helps me defend. I care about the ability to defend and the ability to respond and recover.
Exactly.
The who done it, I can leave to others to decide, and people are far better equipped to give those answers, I think, as well.
Exactly. But I think we are watching, of course. I mean, I think one of the interesting challenges will be the way that the cyber criminal groups evolve, particularly around the Russia-Ukraine context. This is some of those jurisdictions have been attractive places for criminals to operate from, and I think we're watching that quite closely. And I think, frankly, ransomware was the big sort of trend of last year in particular. So criminals who wanted to not only take your data hostage but also threaten to release it, and therefore effectively hold you hostage in that context. There will be new future trends. I don't expect us to be able to stop criminals evolving. I think the challenge is to try and build a resilience so that the impact they have is less and less. And frankly, so that the UK is not an attractive place to do this. We want it to look hard. We want people to think, you know what, I'd much rather go somewhere else.
I can't have you at a university without talking about skills.
Sure.
We all know there's a skills shortage in cyber. Cyber is multidisciplinary. It's almost a misnomer to call cyber a thing. It's a series of complex and different skills underneath, different domains. How is NCSC supporting the UK specifically to address the skills shortage? What can we do about it to encourage more people into the domain?
So it's a great question, and it's one of the things that really keeps me up awake at night. So I think that, frankly, because this is an issue for us as an organisation, it's an issue for you as an organisation, but it's an issue for the whole country. I mean, this is a matter for our future prosperity as well as our future security. And also, it's a really exciting career that, bluntly, I think kids of sort of 12 and 13 today can see as a fantastically exciting prospect for their futures. So what we do is a lot of quite pioneering work, a program called Cyber First that runs courses, runs bursaries. My favourite part of it, I confess, is the Cyber First Girls competition, which we run annually, which I just presented the prizes at up in Bradford. Competition for 12-year-old girls before they make decisions about GCSEs to really get them excited about the fact that cybersecurity is not some kind of geeky thing they need to leave to the boys. We just don't have enough diversity in this industry. So we don't have enough talent, But unless we look really widely at the sort of full range of potential talent, frankly, for us as a national organisation, that's a really serious responsibility. But also, we're missing a huge part of the pool. So we care a lot about bringing in not just more talent, but also more diverse talent. And part of what we're doing, I think, is a demonstration effect to show that it's possible to get a wide range of people interested. I mean, I met one of your master's students who's just converted from an architecture degree to a master's in cybersecurity. We really think there's an issue about assessing aptitude as much as experience. Yep. But I think we also like to see the kind of basic STEM skills taught in schools in a way that means that people are equipped to make those choices, but also to come to universities able to go to a kind of higher level rather than needing to start with the basics. So there's a really great live conversation to have about this. We play a role. The Cybersecurity Council, I hope increasingly will play an important role in the profession and the industry, but also it's for all of us that are involved, I think, to really try and widen that pipeline, but also try and be clearer about the opportunities that exist as well.
And from an industry point of view, we obviously need deep technical, high quality skills, and it's an open secret that we all compete for those skills when they come to the market, and we all fight very hard to have them in our industries. But something I'm really passionate about actually is this multidisciplinary approach. So we spoke about having potentially people from business degrees actually then converting into cyber, because it's not just about the technical, it's about how you can bring that to the board level, how you can ensure your risk management approach comes through that with your business side. Actually, a partnership between Airbus and Cardiff is to have psychologists embedded in our cybersecurity program for our cyber culture change, and that's probably something that we as industry need to drive as well as NCSC, I think.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, one of the most important teams we have is the socio-technical team in NCSC, who think about how it is that the guidance we offer actually lands with human beings. And that's partly how we came up with the password research we did, for example, the 3 random words, much easier to remember, to get a long, safe password than putting together a random string of digits and letters that you either have to write down or forget immediately. Though, of course, I'm absolutely fine to use a password manager if that's what you choose to do as well, so strongly recommend it. But understanding how it is that humans interact with the systems for me is absolutely key. I mean, we can't expect that everybody in society is going to be able to read pages of different guidance. One of the things that worries me is that if you're a small business, you're trying to start up something with 2 or 3 people, I want you to be able to get the same advice from your bank, from your accountant, from your friend who set up a business, that helps you've done the 4 or 5 things that will keep you safe, that you've bought the services that actually mean somebody else is worrying about this on your behalf as well. You've understood and managed your risks. But I want that to feel really easy and really comfortable. And I think we need to make this feel much more normal and much less kind of techie and special. So I worry a lot when I hear people saying, oh, well, that sort of, I'm not technical, or this is not my generation. It's like, sorry, no excuse. I mean, if you're a CEO, you need to understand, frankly, the risks your lawyer is describing to you, the risks your accountant is describing to you equally. You ought to hold a conversation with your CISO that makes sense to you if you're not a technical expert. So having those people who can translate that, but also who can understand the human impact of it, I think is absolutely vital. And I also think it's really exciting and interesting. I mean, you work in the aviation industry. I think there's oodles of experience in the aviation industry and the debate on safety to bring across into cybersecurity and understand how you avoid those mistakes that lead to real disasters. But I mean, it must be fascinating.
Yeah, we have a fundamental principle of black box thinking. The irony, of course, is black boxes are red and not black.
Yeah, exactly.
But the principle is we always ask why to the nth degree.
Exactly.
And we never apportion blame during the investigation phase, because you want to understand why that decision was taken or why that near miss occurred. And it can be everything from cockpit design to cognitive burden of pilots to evacuation of an aircraft, for example, to the security measures you see at an airport as part of that whole ecosystem. And it always fascinates me why we don't apply that in the cybersecurity space. We always say, you had this vulnerability, you got owned, it's your fault, or this wasn't patched. And I think as an industry, we can move a lot more towards that black box thinking type approach to start learning the lessons to design systems. And when we talk about human factors, we inevitably and inherently go to talking about end users. Cybersecurity experts, cybersecurity technical people are humans too. And the way we design our firewall systems or our security solutions right now is complex and not intuitive. It's things that humans don't do well, and that's one of the areas I'd really like to probe with the psychologists as well for that black box thinking, because the aviation sector has decades of experience in that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, one of the things we worry about as well is sort of some of the national scale issues of how is it you can make frankly, the internet automatically safer and easier to use for the whole of society. Because you're exactly right, the way the internet has grown has sort of meant, in as much I think of it as an inverted pyramid, we've sort of piled a huge amount of risk and dependency on sort of what was a very fragile beginning that was never intended to have this level of kind of stress put on it. And so just understanding how we can design out some of the kind of risks that are inherent in the way we operate, I think is really fundamental and frankly would have huge benefits.
One last question, if I may.
Of course.
We've got an audience of students
Yep.
or early careers as well as those who are perhaps more experienced. Somebody looking to get into this industry, whether a technical background or from one of the other domains,
Yep.
What advice would you give them about what a career looks like and where they should be going, how they should get here?
So the first thing I'd say is I think it's just hugely exciting. So I, in many ways, actually, if you start a career in cybersecurity now, who knows where it will take you in 30 years? But I can guarantee that the knowledge and use will be useful in such a wide range of skills and industries. So I would say I think that this is when somebody asked me why I wanted this job, I said this is the future. I've spent 20 years working in national security and foreign policy. I know that I and many of my colleagues don't know enough about technology and how it will shape our world. So in the next decade, our world will be fundamentally affected, both in terms of the economy, but also our security, by the way technology shapes our life. The rules behind it effectively will shape, almost in a sense, the way the world operates. So it's an incredibly exciting industry to get involved in. But also, I think the other thing I'd say is it's really accessible. So as I watched a bunch of 12-year-old girls desperately competing to try and win these prizes, it's a set of fun games they were playing, right? I mean, this cybersecurity is fun. I've just been to your lab. It can be quite hands-on. It's not just about sitting behind a computer screen. So for me, the keys are, this is quite accessible. There are many different ways in. We have, I think, a hairdresser who transferred through on one of our courses. As I say, met an architect. You don't need to come to this with a computer science, GCSE A-level or degree, much as I think they're great things to do. So it's accessible, but also I think it has huge potential. I mean, you and I both know there are simply not enough people in the UK or globally with the skills we need, either for the high end or indeed actually for some of the entry-level jobs. So this is a seller's market. It's a fantastic industry where I think you can guarantee that people will have a huge range of opportunities, both nationally but also in local areas. So we're really keen on the ecosystems we see growing up, for example, in places like here in Wales, that mean that actually these are jobs people can do whether they want to travel far or like you have, or whether they want to stay close to home. But what would your advice be?
Yeah, so I think for me it's very similar. The industry we work in is so unique almost in terms of the way it changes every 6 months. So somebody like me, I really like to learn and I always like new challenges.
Yep.
And certainly being a CISO is a challenge. But because everything changes every 6 months, the threat landscape changes, the tech stacks change every 12 months.
Yep.
You're forever learning something new, and you always have conversations like this
Yep.
with different people where you take new things away. And I think that's absolutely, having that passion for the industry is a really good place to start. The big advice I would have for people is to, early on in a career, is be broad.
Yep.
There's this tendency to hyper-specialize straight away. I want to be a pen tester, or I want to be a cyber forensics, and actually if your early career, you can try your hand at almost everything, because then you'll know which one of those domain segments you really want to be in. And I've certainly done that myself throughout my career history. I started out doing architecture, some offensive things. With my PhD, I was looking much more around psychology and trust and how we build trust in systems. So now more on the risk side and the business side. So for me, having that early stage of breadth throughout the industry, I think would be the biggest advice I'd give people. Don't just hyper-specialize too quickly. You've got plenty of time to do that.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I really appreciate you coming down to the university today and joining us. Thank you very much for joining us for the Cardiff University-led virtual cybersecurity lecture series, bringing together industry figures to share their knowledge. And I hope you enjoyed it and found it insightful. We'll be launching further videos this year and beyond, discussing hot topics with sector leaders. Please do check them out. You can find out more about Cardiff University Centre for Cybersecurity Research and how they collaborate to deliver real-world solutions at the centre's website. Thank you very much. Stay safe.